Hello and welcome to Once More with Feeling. I'm your host, Edmund Scribbins. Today we're looking at Amorphous, the fifth studio album from Illinois-based band Icon for Hire. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Icon for Hire, and I'll admit I was until my friend Askaluna made a recommendation that I cover this album, they formed in 2007 by founding members Ariel Bloomer and Sean Jump, who are the vocalist slash pianist and guitarist slash keyboardist respectively. They very effectively make a blend of pop, electronica, hip-hop, hard rock and elements of industrial, which seems to have been something they more recently introduced in their last couple of albums. The aim of their music is to save the world, and what they mean by that is to create a refuge and a source for people to reach out to, maybe having mental health problems, home difficulties, any of that sort of circumstance. This album in particular was fueled by multiple things. Part of it was frustrations with the 2020 pandemic. They were in Russia at the time when the news was breaking about it, and they had to cancel their tour and return to the States. And they only just got back just as borders were being closed. So they were very angry about the situation, and they figured that that was the time where they could really express themselves creatively. They could very effectively create a refuge for everyone else suffering from the anxieties surrounding the pandemic. And they wanted to really dig deeper than they ever have before and discuss subjects that they haven't previously touched upon. Having listened to some of their older stuff, it definitely sounds like they took what they previously had done and gone, okay, that was good, how can we make it even better? And there really does feel like there's a definite personal connection. You really get an idea of where they're coming from, and at the same time you feel like there's a strong, relatable through line that gives the listener the idea of, oh, I am not alone. I have someone who understands where I'm coming from, what problems I may be facing. And it was that combined with the music, those two qualities really had me going, I've got to talk about this, I've got to cover this, even if it's a month after the album got released. With that out of the way, let's get right to it. So to begin with, we have the songs Brittle Prelude and Brittle. Now, Brittle Prelude is essentially a very intriguing sampling of Brittle proper, with extra sort of mysterious soundscaping going on that affects the concept of sort of slipping in and out of consciousness, which is emphasised by later on the usage of heart monitor sounds as it goes from prelude to brittle. This very much is bringing home the idea of sort of mental health problems and suicidal ideation and the risks therein, with the lines of "I've been strong for too long sometimes" and "I'm just a statistic," which that one is a rather intriguing refrain that definitely brings home the messages being conveyed. There's a very cool dichotomy demonstrated through the long lines.
I'm not brittle, well maybe just a little.
For anyone who's had sort of depression, anxiety, anything like that, it definitely is something that makes you go, yeah, they know what they're talking about. And this is reflected in the music, which is this very nice sort of piano work for the verses, and then the choruses are much more industrial electronica with dubstep elements. Carefully crafted chaos would be the best way to describe it, and it really makes you go, yeah, this is exactly what it's like to go from feeling fine to not being fine. It discusses concepts which very much feel like it's the issues of being institutionalized.
They put me in a box, slap a label on the top, take me up and ship me off. Now I'm someone else's problem.
The societal pressures that can place on one's mental health, and the need to recognise that you are more than just the label that has been slapped on you with the line,
keep breathing, don't lose focus. I'm alive, I'm not a diagnosis.
That becomes a refrain and a personal, and then addressing the audience, because it changes.
Keep breathing, don't lose focus. You're alive, you're not a diagnosis.
Basically, that really is sort of a, yeah, you have these mental health issues, but people need to see that you are more than just that. And they can't just simply put you in a box and ship you away, not to be acknowledged any further. This is admittedly one of those songs that the more you listen to, the more you can find out. And honestly, I could probably dissect this for about an hour just on its own, probably longer, because there is so much going on that I was like, yeah, that's how it is. You know what it's like. You definitely get it. And yeah, it's a great opener for the album, and it's definitely putting the best foot forward.
Keep breathing, don't lose focus.
Curse or Cure. Now this was a highly relatable song. In fact, it's one of my favourites on the album. It very much encapsulates the fears and anxieties and invasive, intrusive thoughts that occur during a depressive episode or any sort of mental health problems, and how there can be the worst experiences as a consequence of the attitudes of those closest to you. There's the line, "You say I'm a hopeless case." That really stuck with me hard, and I'm sure a lot of people who've experienced mental health problems would go, oh my god, I've pretty much heard those exact words. Another one is, confusing a sick mind is not that hard to do. That line alone is perfect, because all it takes is just a bad day, a bad episode, and someone to say just the wrong thing, and you don't know what's right and what's wrong. It really frames the idea of biting back at the gaslighters quite frequently.
Oh,
And ultimately, it does really do well with going through sort of how much of your road to recovery is personal, how much of it is what other people say or do, what your environment is, and how much of it is medication. Very much sort of questions, the concepts of being a burden to others. And ultimately, it's sort of a progression through the song. It goes over what you've been driven to think of yourself, and then realizing that there are toxic people who could be contributory to how you're feeling. In particular, there's one line near the end which really summarised this concept very effectively. This would be very fitting on any sort of hard rock album. I definitely was expecting sort of hard rock, heavy metal kind of vibes from the opening of the Air Raid Siren, which in itself is a really nice touch, because when you're going through the problems of invasive, intrusive thoughts, it feels like you're having a bombing run going on in your head. So that in itself was very nice. The guitar work is a very nice heavy sound. There's a good frenetic drumming going on. There's very cool variations which really do feel like sort of a war scene going on, and the progression almost feels like a final battle between two bitter rivals. And there's also one thing that I wouldn't normally comment on, but really worked well, is there's a rhythmic clapping that punctuates it and almost feels like the ticking of a clock, as though counting down the hours of the struggle within your own mind. Once again, I could dissect this for hours. Every line feels like what you tell yourself, what other people will say to you, what in turn, because of what other people have said to you, you convince yourself of being the case. And ultimately the resolution of it's not necessarily all on me. And that really very effectively worked. Enemies. This was an interesting sit for me, because it had a particular sound that I really could not shake. First off, the nature of the lyrics, which again we get into some very heavy discussions of attitudes to your own inner demons and how it can go into a sort of cyclical fashion.
Here we go again, do-si-do again, one step, two steps back and forward.
It's almost like you're dancing around with your own black dog, as Churchill would term it, or just your personal demons. Like, there's the line. It's almost a way of mocking the whole romanticised concept of the tortured artist. You know, there's always this idea that some artists need their depression so that they can make great art, when the truth of the matter is most people who are experiencing mental health problems, yeah, they don't want that. It doesn't help them. In fact, it makes everything go to crap. But at the same time, sometimes it can help. It's sort of like the whole I make friends with all my demons. This album has been fueled by frustration, by mental health struggles. It's their demons that they've made friends with to produce this record. I do feel like lyrically it did have a much greater personal identity than musically. It is taking interesting cues very much from the likes of Tech 9 and Eminem, but it was kind of strange because all through the song I couldn't shake the feeling that it sounded like it belonged on the Nightmare Before Christmas soundtrack. All throughout the song I kept expecting Ariel Bloomer to come out with the line, "I am the clown with the tearaway face." I could not shake this feeling all throughout. I was just thinking, this is Halloween, this is Halloween. Doesn't necessarily make it a bad song. In fact, it is a good song. It's a very nice sort of carry-on of the themes being presented. I just had great difficulty shaking this feeling. I do have to wonder if it was deliberate. I would be interested to find out if that were the case. You know, sort of reflecting on the dichotomies presented in that film and using that as an influence for what is in this song. Maybe I'm reading too much into it and it's just an interesting coincidence of musical sound. Who knows? It doesn't entirely sound like This Is Halloween, it's just there are moments that had me feeling that. It almost sounds like when you had Nightmare Revisited and you had some metal covers of This Is Halloween. That kind of sound going. As I say, not a bad song, it was just a peculiar experience. Next, we have Panic Attacks. Again, a heavily relatable one for me because I have, on various occasions, experienced very severe panic attacks, panic, anxiety, a lot of mixtures of the two. And it very effectively, timing-wise, is very good because it very effectively brings things down a bit musically. It's much more piano-driven with electronica mixed in with it. And there's not so much of the heavy guitar work going on. And it almost feels like a conversation between Ariel Bloomer and the Panic Attacks themselves, which is... I was talking to my mum about this a while back, and it's almost similar to a method she would use when doing bereavement counselling of the empty chair, which ultimately was where you would have the person talk to their loved one whilst they're facing an empty chair, and the progression would be going from talking to the person to talking to the illness that took them away, or whatever it happened to be. And that sort of thing very much felt... at times it felt like, on some listens, it felt like it was a direct dialogue between Ariel Bloomer and the Panic Attacks. At other times, it felt like a three-way conversation between her, a loved one. It's very well written in that you could insert, if this is the intention, you could insert any sort of loved one. It could be significant other, it could be a parent, could be a sibling, could be a cousin, someone you are close to. It at times felt like a conversation between her, a loved one, and the panic attacks. And it's very interesting how it can almost depend on your mood at the time as to which interpretation you receive of it, but both I feel are valid. What's really, really effective is you have this this leitmotif of repeatedly saying, "I'm sorry."
I'm sorry I doubted you. Sorry I made you shut up. I couldn't face the truth. It scared me too much, so I kept you locked up. 'Cause I didn't know that I needed you till you let me know.
I'm sorry for not acknowledging that you are a part of me, that sometimes you happen to get me out of a bad situation, to maybe think a bit more about what I should do. It really spoke to me on multiple levels. I had to deal with being on both sides of things. It definitely rang true for collective experiences there. Including sort of apologising for experiencing them, which I find it very curious that we all do that, and we really shouldn't. And it's almost like this song is saying, no, you shouldn't be apologising for experiencing them. You should be acknowledging that they're there, because it might be the only way that you don't do harm to yourself. After that, we have Seeds. This was an okay song for me. Lyrically, it does work quite well as an analysis of their experiences, because it's important to note that this album was kickstarted, as was their previous album, because they are not signed to any label. Interestingly enough, how they funded this one, they set the goal for production at something like 2,900 and something, and that was to do with the number of backers for the previous album. And they exceeded that by about... it was at present standing, and I hope, because this album deserves it, that number will go up. It's around 3,500, possibly 36. It works very well lyrically as a fuck the critics, fuck the label, we're going to do what we want to do. And the Seeds is very much, it's a very effective imagery. It's sort of like, they try to water us down, just give us what we need, shove us underground and just set us free. They try to bury us, they didn't know we were. It really works well lyrically. It definitely gives you a sense of their own personal identity and their attitudes to all the shit that they've had to deal with. The problem I have with it is production quality on this could be a bit sharper. There's some rough points. With the chorus, there is some slight drowning out of the word seeds. I do have to wonder if that was deliberate, as though to mock the record label for trying to do that. But it does grate on me somewhat. But that's personal preference. It's a decent track. I would still listen to it in future. I feel it does also lack a bit musically in terms of identity. I do feel like it's a bit more generic in its sound. To me, it just sounded like a very typical pump-up anthem. If you just stripped out, if you were to strip out the lyrics, it would sound much more like your standard pump-up anthem that you might get in any given club. So, as I say, it's not a horrible song, but it was ultimately a bit fillery for me. Next is 13. Now this is a very starkly beautiful yet haunting interlude. It's only 1 minute and 11 seconds, but in that time, Ariel Bloomer paints this very clear picture of what it's like to be dealing with mental health problems from a very young age. That's the point of the title, that's when they really reared their ugly head. It very much put me in mind of the likes of Tori Amos and Garbage when they're doing more stripped down work. And, well, suffice to say, in 1 minute and 11 seconds, 2 of my favourite female artists were brought to mind. So, definitely doing something good there. I'm not going to belabour the point, but this definitely felt like a good bridge to sort of close out chapter 1 and then go on to chapter 2 effectively for the album. Whether that was the intention, I'm not sure, but I can definitely see that as being the point.
Just keep going, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going,
Next, you have Last One Standing. This is a return to the sound from earlier on in the album, and genuinely requires a few listens to really understand the message they're going for. Admittedly, I had to listen to it a few times to not just go, oh, this is just your standard tropes for a battle anthem. It does work well for that concept, but more than that, it's really driving home the concept of being an individual, striving for that individuality and not letting the normies squeeze that out of you, no matter how hard they try. This one had much more of a hard rock vibe than the previous songs, with odd intersplicings of electronica here and there to round out the sound. There is a very victorious feeling to it. It's sort of going to the audience and bring them up by the lapels, going, you're a badass. Don't let them tell you otherwise. It's almost, I realise this is going to be for the nerds in the audience, but it's almost the don't believe in yourself, believe in me that believes in you. You can do anything. I know you can. There's so many bridges and swells, and there's this particular line that really works well. They always come for the wild ones.
They always come for the wild ones. They always come for the freaks. They always come for the misfits, like you and me.
And that really, I think about, thinking back on various experiences at school, the whole feeling of being a square peg shoved in a round hole, and just one thing that always sticks with me, may have developed a bit of a complex about it, is how I would get harangued so much about the fact that I had long hair. Like, this is by no means a new thing, that I've rocked the long locks for as long as I can remember. Well, not as long as I can remember, that would be ridiculous, but funnily enough, since I was 13, I've had long hair. And that was a source of derision from a lot of my peers. The more I listened to it, the more I thought about what was being said, the more I was sort of like, actually, yeah, they do. And it's important that I don't let any of what's been said bring me down. Whether it's back then, whether it's now. I need to be me. And I hope that everyone who listens to that song feels that. Waste My Hate. I wasn't a fan of this one. There were a few too many aspects that made me go, nah, this could possibly have been cut. The playground-esque nursery rhyme style segments mixed with a rather strange rhythm on the guitars and an unfortunate hiss in the production made it not an especially fun sit for me. I feel like if this had been given a bit more polish, I could have enjoyed it a bit more. With that said, with all of this said, all my own personal misgivings, it does have a decent message outlining how it's a waste of time, energy, breath, and mental space worrying about those who hate you. This is actually the way you do a Fuck the Haters song. Like, if you look at the likes of Lil Wayne and Taylor Swift, they've done sort of kiss-offs to the haters, and it's always come across as, hey, people who don't like me, listen to how I don't care about what you think about me. Whereas this is more of an outright, yeah, there's no point me wasting my energy on hating you. You are not important to how I actually get further in life. Which, again, I can relate to. I have had someone outright go, I hate you, to me. And I'm just sort of like, no skin off my nose. I barely think of you as an entity. I only know of you in any way because you are my friend's boyfriend. It really makes no matter mind to me. And that was a very peculiar experience, and I kind of wish I had this song around then, so I could just be sort of, this would be one time where I'd happily play it. Like, even the songs that I haven't necessarily enjoyed that much on this album, I can still say have merit, and I can see other people enjoying it. It's just a personal preference that maybe could have worked better as a bonus song. But this could also have been them, once again, sending a message to the record labels. For all I know, the record labels could have been rather vindictive with their actions, and they're just sort of like, okay, what have you got? As I say, it's still a decent message that a lot more people need to heed. In fact, I could have done with heeding it a bit more a while back, but hey ho. Next, we have another interlude with Impossibles and Obstacles, which is a really cool hailback to older hip-hop stylings, having somewhat of a freestyling vibe. It's almost like Ariel Bloomer is just rattling off concepts of relating her own mental health struggles to the audience and how they can find solace in talking to her about them. There's one particular line: I want people to understand that they're not alone. There's not really much to say on this one, aside from it's a very nice round out for what's been presented across the album. Part of the reason I say it's got a freestyling vibe is the wind out is just studio talk that really feels like they were having fun making the track. I really enjoyed it just as a quick sort of like, okay, I see where you're going with this and I can vibe with it. Sticks and Stones. This was my other favourite on the album, and it was just... It's a very good hard rock song and very much delivers this attitude of, I'm a badass, you lot are badasses, and what the critics have to say, what the record companies have to say, we defy all of it. And there are elements of it that are sort of a female empowerment anthem, and this is a really well done example of that. It's basically a case of, yeah, they probably thought I was difficult because I'm a woman, instead of me outright having a fair claim to what I'm saying. And
telling everyone my head is too big for my crown, 'cause when a woman wears it, that's what they say.
It's not just a declaration of defiance for these entities, it's also a declaration of how, yes, I've got these problems, I've laid them out to bear in the songs prior, and now you're going to hear of how I won't let them hold me back. I may have my bad days, I may have to think about what the critics might have said, and I'm going to fight back, and it just oozes through the music. Like, this, it's a very good hard rock song, and it builds, it pulls back, builds again, and eventually hits a climactic solo that is glorious. You have this feeling of, oh yes, this is how it's done, take me home. If you are to listen to just one song from this album to really whet your appetite for the rest and to give you an idea of whether or not you'll enjoy the rest, this is the song to listen to. Following on from that, we have Warrior. I'll be honest, I wasn't a fan of this one. It kind of felt like two songs had gotten into a car crash. Both good songs. The problem is they didn't fit together. That there were elements that felt misplaced. You've got this.
Damn, it feels good to be a warrior.
It just felt at odds with the sound of the rest of the chorus. Also, it felt like it was retreading the ground covered by Last One Standing and Sticks and Stones. I didn't feel like it added much to the overall vibe of the album, and ultimately I feel like it could have been cut. Lastly, we have Only Be a Story. This very nicely closed the album. It brought the music down, having more of a pop vibe to it, whilst still having a strong personal identity and delivering a powerful, albeit sombre message about how their attitudes are towards what might be left after they're gone. And ultimately having the hope that when they're thought of, when that time finally comes and what they remain is as a story, it's fondly told, they're remembered affectionately. It really worked well as making you feel wanting more. The way it closes, it just very nicely comes to an end, and you're genuinely left with a, oh, that's it? Can we have some more? Perfect way to end an album, in my opinion. Again, you reflect on songs like that, and you find yourself thinking, how would I want to be remembered? How would I want friends to tell my story? How would I want my children to tell my story, or my nieces? Overall, you really get this feeling of, yeah, this is, like, I know at the end I'm just going to be a story like everyone ultimately is. But please let it be a good one. If I did it all again. It had this very nice sort of sweeping piano and a very ethereal and almost ghost-like to it. So it was almost a reflection of how it opened. The opening was almost a tragedy, and the closing was a peaceful resolution. I feel like if I was to see them in concert, that is the song that I'd want to hear played last, just to have me go, yeah, that was a good evening. That's a concert I'll remember. Overall, I would give Amorphous a 4 out of 5. It's got a strong personal identity for the most part. you definitely get the feeling of the band wanting to include you in the music and relate to you and understand you. You really had this feeling of wanting to hear more. Like, I had to check out more from them because just this album was so great that I needed to hear more. If you are to check out specific tracks to just get a taster, then definitely go with Brittle, Curse or Cure, Last One Standing, and Sticks and Stones. Those are the 4 that I would absolutely recommend as introductory songs. If you're looking for something a bit more on the experimental side in terms of blending genres and really creating new sounds that you didn't think were necessarily possible, then this is your band. They really know how to make you go, huh, I didn't think those two, I didn't think pop and industrial could work together, but I was wrong. So yeah, definitely check this out. So, with all that out of the way, that's it for this episode. No idea what the next episode is going to be on, but more than likely it's going to be a recommendation. If anyone has any suggestions, feel free to stay in the comments. I'm always ready to listen to new stuff or old stuff if you want to hear my views on that. So, I will see you next time, and I can safely say that I may be a little bit brittle.
They call me damaged, I let them think what they like. They call me difficult, cause I don't fit in the lines. But I didn't get this far without any scars. I'm not brittle, well maybe just a little.